Hello everyone, it's your boy Ash here, and this time around I wanted to talk to you guys about the DLC for Pokémon Scarlet and Violet that just recently finished its release cycle. Aside from the epilogue, we're gonna talk about this later. Put a pin on that. I may notice that I'm in a slightly different background today. This is my living room. I'm here for no particular reason. I just kind of wanted to change backgrounds for a bit. I don't know. I'm like that. I'm weird like that. Also, I guess our Christmas tree is here, so yeah, Merry Christmas. Count this as my Christmas special, if you will. Before we start, I want to let you guys know that this will contain spoilers for the entirety of the Hidden Treasure of Area Zero DLC, so both Part 1, TL Mask, as well as Part 2, Indigo Disc, they will be broken down and analyzed and discussed today here, so if you haven't finished them, make sure to do so if you don't want to get spoiled on any story reveals or any gameplay mechanics you might not want to know before getting into it. I want to let you know that, maybe if you're not aware, I already made a video on base game Scarlet and Violet. It's a video essay I made a few months ago after I finished the base game. And there I talk about my relationship with the game, what I like about it, what I don't like about it, and why ultimately I think it's a pretty great game despite all the technical issues it suffers from. And as like an initial thing getting into the DLC, it's important to know that that hasn't really changed. The game is still pretty much a technical mess. In fact, it's probably a little bit worse in the DLC since the environments are a little bit more sort of like visually ambitious. Stuff looks very pretty. The lighting in the graphics is surprisingly good for these games, and I feel like the DLC actually takes more advantage of that, but since the performance is so bad, the game is even more laggy and it's very prone to glitching. There was one cutscene in Part 2, like one of those dialogue boxes lists cutscenes where you really feel like the game should have voice acting, but it doesn't. The game just started freezing on me. I wish I had footage of that to show you guys, but the cutscene just started freezing. I barely could like understand what was going on because it just kept like stopping in the middle. It's a freaking cutscene. It's arguably one of the most scripted cutscenes in the whole game. Why is it freezing? It's kind of unacceptable. Yeah, so sadly they haven't fixed that. They really should have done more patches by now to actually fix the game performance and make sure it's actually good. They've had enough time to do that. I don't know what's the holdup here, what's the issue, or I understand that Game Freak and all the developers behind the Pokemon series, they suffer from a lot of crunch. And that's why these games usually are so unpolished. You can really feel like, yeah, this franchise is being pushed around by freaking capitalism. And you can tell these developers seriously need more time to make these games. And yeah, that sucks, but still, like, they have enough money to fix that stuff. I seriously wish they would. It's the biggest issue with this game, and it's one of those things where, like, yeah, I still want to recommend this game to everyone else because it's so good, it's so fun, I enjoy it so much, it means so much to me. But it's hard to, like, recommend it with a straight face and be like, yeah, play it, it's great, because there's always, like, this little thing in the back of my mind was like, yeah, but it's kind of, like, glitchy and unfinished and kind of a mess, like, oh, I swear it's good, it's glitchy, it's a mess, but it's good. So yeah, starting off, I'm a little bit disappointed that before the DLC or even during it, they didn't manage to actually patch the game and fix the technical issues, because that is frankly kind of baffling when you stop and really think about it. But enough about that. If you are able to accept that what's here is actually genuinely so good still. One thing that I was a little bit disappointed about was the fact that it doesn't, initially anyway, it doesn't really build on the base game story that much. It's more of its own original thing, especially Part 1 where you go to Kitakami and you meet Ogerpon and Kieran and Carmine and all these new different people. It's more of its own original story rather than a direct continuation of the base game. And since I loved the base game so much, since I enjoyed the characters and wanted to see them again, I was a little bit sad about that at first. But what happened was, as I played through Part 1 especially, I got endeared to these new characters. They freaking did it again. They introduced new characters and they made them interesting and fun, gave them fun, interesting arcs, compelling stories. and just the new region in general, Kitakami, it's really fun to explore, and it has this really nice sort of like traditional Japanese vibe with the festival and all, the clothing you can get and stuff, and the masks. The vibes in general for both parts of the DLC are just really, really nice. I love the atmosphere. It feels much more inspired than the base game. Paldea is fun. I like Paldea, and you get to see like a little bit of that Iberian Peninsula inspiration behind it if you really look for it, especially in the towns and stuff. But the open world itself is a little bit basic, and I feel like with both Blueberry Academy in Part 2 and Kitakami in Part 1, we get slightly more unique vistas and slightly more creative environments that are very fun to explore and emit certain like vibes and atmospheres that I really like. And with that and the new original characters, this DLC, starting with Part 1, really endeared me. Personally, as far as the new characters go, I don't really jive with Carmine that much. I understand this is kind of like a contentious topic among the fans of the DLC, but I just feel like Carmine is kind of mean for no reason at all. And I understand where she's coming from, where, you know, her arc is about accepting that people from outside the region can come in and have fun as long as they're respectful, and her whole aversion to outsiders makes sense, and it's supposed to be a critique of that kind of stuff, tourism and whatnot. Which is kind of ironic considering the Pokemon World's Championship that's going on in Hawaii next year, but neither here or there. But I don't know, even in Part 2, she's so really mean to other people who aren't the protagonist, and her quote-unquote redemption felt really abrupt. And I don't really like how Kieran's whole breakdown arc is kind of her fault in a way, because she's mean, and she's been mean to her brother for a lot of time. Seemingly, it surely hits like that anyway. That's at least like my reading on it, is that Kieran, he's you know, starting off, he's this shy, awkward kid and stuff, and Carmine she's there's no other way to describe it. She's just mean. She's kind of a jerk at first, and you get the sense that she does care about her brother, but she really doesn't understand what he's feeling. And when the whole mental breakdown starts off for Kieran, you really get the vibe that she just doesn't get it. She doesn't really know what's going on and freaking attributes it to teenage hormones or something. Like, come on, dude, it's kind of your fault that he's like this. And even like in Part 2, the way she talks about Drayton, or she keeps bickering with him for no reason, even though he's the most chill dude I've ever met. Dude's the best. Drayton is just the freaking best. I love that guy. We're gonna get to that when we get to Part 2. But yeah, when we got to the point where she did apologize and she was like, yeah, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have treated you like that, yada yada, and suddenly she's a quote-unquote like good guy. She's trying to help you out with the whole Ogerpon thing that was going on. I just kind of didn't buy it, to be honest. It didn't feel genuine, and there's the whole bittersweet scene in the end of Part 1 where she's saying goodbye to you and going back to the academy, and she's like, oh, we're gonna meet again someday, right? And then she's like, bye and stuff. It's supposed to be all cute and wholesome. I wasn't feeling it. I seriously wasn't feeling it. It just didn't hit me as particularly endearing, which is weird because I'm usually like very sensitive to this kind of stuff. I'm really good at just getting endeared to any kind of character ever. I have a history of liking characters everyone thinks annoying, but in the case of Carmine, nah, it just didn't click for me. No offense to her fans or anything, it just kind of didn't click for me. Hey, future editing Ash here. And I just wanted to jump in here again because ever since I recorded this video, discussions surrounding Carmine and her character have gotten slightly more heated around the Pokemon fan base, especially on like Twitter and stuff, because people are discussing if she's way too mean or not, and it's getting to a point where it's kind of too much from both sides. Guys, this character, she's a teenager. She's not an abuser. She's not that terrible of a human being. She's just kind of selfish and oblivious, like a little bit arrogant and stuff. And if you like that, that's fine too. You can enjoy these characters because she's fine. She's a well-written character who serves her purpose. That's okay. It's just that to me, she wasn't that endearing in her whole quote-unquote like redemption, so to speak. The moment in the story where she was supposed to start being endearing to the player that didn't quite work for me that well. But it's fine to like her. And honestly, a lot of the fan work I've seen on Twitter and all the things people have been sharing about her around in the fan base has endeared me to her just a little bit more. And like, yeah, she's fine, she's all right. I still don't quite jive with her in the main story itself, but she's okay. Let's not judge people's media literacy by how much they like or dislike a character. It's fine to not like her. It's fine to like her, as long as you're not being stupid and arrogant. Then it's okay. But in contrast to that, I really like Kieran, her brother. He has a very interesting arc where he sort of like goes into a little bit of a self-loathing breakdown over you getting Ogerpon instead of him. And initially, I just liked him from the start because he's such like a cute little fella. I enjoy his interactions with the player character in the start of the DLC and how you're kind of like his only friend, but it's cute, it's fun. I like Kieran at first, and then when stuff starts actually happening and he goes through his whole arc, I was concerned for him, and I'm partially kind of guilty too, and that's something really cool the story does, where it kind of makes you feel bad for the choices you've made, and it's weird. We're gonna get to that a little more when we get to part 2 again, but it's sort of like you're kind of at fault for this. You're kind of, from his perspective, you're kind of the bad guy, and I seriously feel bad for that. And that's something really different and unique for Pokemon. Usually when Pokemon there's like bad guys, it's either like a twist villain or a really generic obnoxious bad guy, or just a mean rival, or it's not a bad guy at all, and it's like a very fun, bubbly rival and stuff. Kieran is kind of like the rare exception where he actually has a little bit of like a Fallout arc, where he starts off as, you know, this cool, chill kid that's maybe a little bit too, you know, socially awkward, and then for understandable reasons, kind of by your own hand, becomes this mess of a human being who's actively antagonistic to the player character. And that's just really fun and interesting to watch, especially as we get into the cliffhanger at the end of part 1, where it just ends with him like swearing to beat you and become better than you. And that was one hell of an ending. Going into part 2, in between part 1 and part 2, I was seriously like invested in wanting to know what's gonna happen next. Oh god, is Kieran the bad guy now? Should I be worried? I was excited, and at the same time I seriously wanted him to get better because I care about Kieran. The first part of the story really made me care and feel concerned for this character, and you know, that was pulled off pretty well. I really liked the direction they took with this character, for real. Kieran in general is just like kind of like an adorable little scrunklo at first, and a deplorable little mean kid by, you know, when his arc actually starts, and I love both sides of his character. Someone who's also an adorable little scrunklo is Ogerpon, the main legendary you catch for the DLC, the first part of the DLC. And, you know, the internet's been memeing about it ever since the part 1 release, but Ogerpon is just adorable. Everyone freaking loves Ogerpon. Even people who didn't like part 1 of the DLC just freaking loves Ogerpon because she's just so cute, right? She's one of the most endearing legendary Pokemon we've gotten. Because you expect this huge beast and stuff, but then boom, just cute little scrunklo, cutesy little gal. And with that, also her backstory and the whole like story you find out about the past of Kitakami and the village and stuff, with the ogre and the traveler and whatnot. It's really interesting. I really love how it was presented, where you see that 2D cutscene with the backstory and all. And you know, whenever a video game, an RPG, does that thing where they're like, oh, this cutscene is gonna be long, be prepared before getting into it. You know you're in for the good shit. You know stuff's gonna get really good when the game warns you about a long cutscene that's about to come up, for real. And yeah, part 1 was just pretty fun. I really seriously enjoyed it, despite, again, still being kind of a technical mess, and I was really excited for part 2. Jump forward a few months, and we finally get to part 2, and we got to, you know, earlier this month when it came out, and it was one of my most anticipated releases this year, actually. And getting into part 2, again, the vibes are just top-notch. I love the whole atmosphere in the Blueberry Academy, the music they have for it, and the sort of like environmental design, I guess. It's just really interesting, really fun. I like how distinct they make it from both Kitakami and Paldea in its original either Yuva or Naranja Academy. In my case, Naranja, because, you know, Scarlet version is best version. So yeah, I was really enjoying that and the whole vibe of the clubs and stuff, the League Club, and the way you can customize your room. I really enjoyed that. And on that note, just exploring the terrarium and doing all the BBQs, blueberry quests, clever. You guys are very clever, you know that, Pokemon? On that note, the freaking localization for these games is just so good. I love how they do puns, and the dialogue feels like actual teenagers talking instead of like a rough approximation of how humans talk, like some of the old games did. So yeah, BBQs are really, really fun. At first, it seems kind of grindy, because when you do them by yourself, they're actually pretty boring, even though they're still weirdly addicting, because to get all the rewards for the League Club, you need a lot of BP, and getting all that BP by yourself it's too much. It would take too much time to like do that by yourself. It's insanely grindy, and that's coming from a competitive player. I know what's grinding. I grind a lot in Pokemon already. That would have been too much. But if you actually get in a group of like 3 or more players, or even 2 players, it's a lot more efficient and it's a lot more fun to do them. I personally don't have any close friends that live physically near me that actually still play Pokemon, so at first I was a little disappointed by that and a little worried by that, but just jumping to Pokemon Discord server and finding people to play with was already enough to make this thing actually fun and endearing and addicting, because you just kind of like, you get into a group, you all do emotes, you take pictures together, and then boom, quest, and it's kind of turns on your dopamine intake in your brain, the little part of your brain that just likes seeing numbers go up and seeing everyone just do one quest after another, and getting all the little notifications. It is admittedly just very addicting. It's maybe not artistically deep, but it makes the freaking brain juices just get going and going and going when you're completing so many quests, and it's genuinely like a memorable, fun experience. Even though I wasn't even chatting with the people I was playing with, it was just fun to do that as a group and look for Ditto blocks and do all these different quests. When you're doing it with different people, even if you don't know them, it's just a very stimulating and fun activity to do. And I imagine it's even more fun with actual friends in voice chat or just talking personally, one right next to the other. One thing Pokemon does really well, even in the worst games, especially starting from like Sword and Shield and stuff with the wild area, is just making sure like group activities like that are just really fun. Back when Sword and Shield was new, a few of my friends were actually into it and playing that, and I remember my best memories about that game were just hopping into the wild area with a group of friends and just doing raids together. And it's kind of grinding, yeah, but it's fun because you're doing it with other people and you're working together and cooperating, and that's kind of what Pokemon has always been all about, really. Connections and working together for a greater goal. And starting with, you know, the older games, it was complete the Pokedex, but now it's just so much more than that. But aside from just the grindy stuff, the main story itself is also really great. The Blueberry Elite Four is seriously super fun. I love the new characters. Pokemon has been doing some really great characters, especially for Scarlet and Violet. Pretty much everyone in the Elite Four is a hit, if you ask me. Alongside Kieran, they're some of my new favorite Pokemon characters. Besides maybe Emerus, the Steel type one, I just don't really. People like her, and I'm not gonna blame you for liking her or anything, but she just kind of didn't, you know, endear me that much. She doesn't have that striking of a personality, if you ask me. But everyone else, Drayton, Lacey, Crispin, and even Kieran, I like them a lot. Their interactions with the player character. Friggin' Drayton is just a chill dude. I love him. He's so cool. He's a little bit lazy, and I understand why Carmine blames him for that, but nah, I don't really. He's a cool dude. He's really fun, and I really enjoy most of his dialogue. And the battles themselves and the trials are also seriously fun. It's some of the hardest battles we've gotten in Pokemon in general, and that's really refreshing coming off of, you know, recent Pokemon. And coming off of doing competitive play, it's nice to have some actually tough battles now that I seriously understand the battle system. Having double battles is really fun because double battles are really deep and something that single-player players usually don't get to experience that much, which is a shame because, again, as someone who plays competitive, there's some of the most fun content you can have in the games and some of the most strategic types of battles and content you can get in Pokemon. So yeah, I'm a fan of double battles in single player. We should have more of them. And in general, they're really tough and they're really strategic and they actually use like competitively viable strategies. When the trailer came out, I sort of thought that they would be closer to something like the Battle Frontier, where you don't actually need to beat them to get any substantial content, but I was wrong. They aren't level locked. They aren't supposed to be training for competitive. They're just sort of inching closer to competitive battling in terms of format and strategies and stuff, but they're still pretty much, single player content you're required to beat, and if you grind enough, you can beat them either way. They're not like insanely difficult, but they still require brain juices and strategy from the player, and that's already pretty good if you ask me. If Pokemon is able to keep that up, doing this very gradual rise in difficulty going into the DLC, I feel like this is a good format. It's not like brain dead like X and Y, but it's not insanely difficult that a casual player can get through it with enough effort and thinking. And I really enjoyed Kieran's final battle. The music they had for it is so freaking good. I love this game's soundtrack in general, and the DLC doesn't disappoint. I enjoy not only Kieran's final battle music, but also the themes for Blueberry Academy, the theme for the Terrarian, the theme for Kitakami, and the battles you have over at Part 1 as well. At the end of this climactic battle, you'd assume the story would be over, but really it isn't, because now the story takes an abrupt turn back into the Area Zero stuff from the base game. And if you ask me, conceptually, that kind of wasn't the best move, because it does sort of come out of nowhere. It almost feels like there was supposed to be a part 3 to this DLC, and I don't know how feasible that would be from a development standpoint, but it kind of feels like the story with the Blueberry Academy should have been its own part, and then you do part 3 later, where it's the Area Zero stuff, and then you could hopefully have also had time to finish off with the base game characters such as Mona, Arvin, and Penny and stuff, and really tie a neat little bow into everything, because this latter part, this finale to the DLC Part 2, kind of feels like it comes out of nowhere. It's trying to pull different stuff from different parts of the story, but it's also trying to be the conclusion to Kieran's arc at the same time. And I feel like that would have been stronger if each of those things had been done separately, where you're trying to answer stuff about Area Zero, but you're also trying to finish off Kieran's whole mental breakdown, and then there's Miss Ryder, who's just kind of insane, and it just sort of like all comes at you at once, and it's, if you ask me, it's a little bit abrupt. I feel like they could have seriously given more time to that stuff, made a whole section where it's just about the Area Zero stuff, bring back everyone from the base game and do like some serious finale stuff. Because it almost feels like it's an identity crisis where it's trying to both be an ending to the base game as well as an ending to this new story the DLC is telling, which is what I talked about before, was the DLC is pretty much trying to do something new. It's not bringing back the original characters. Initially, it was not about the same stuff the base game was about, and just now, at this very end, they bring back Area Zero, they bring back terrestrialization as a main topic, and suddenly they're trying to do all this stuff at once, and it kind of feels a little bit messy. However, the story itself is pretty great. One thing I'll mention though is like, yeah, it starts off right after you beat Kieran, and then there's like, they call a few students from Blueberry who would be strong enough trainers to go into Area Zero and explore it. And something I don't really get is why Carmine is in there as well, because I don't know what the metric was for which students would be called for that, but you kind of like understand that they're looking for strong trainers, right? So they call the player character, who is kind of already a champion of Paldea, and the school doesn't know yet, but he's now the champion of the Blueberry League as well. And Kieran is the X-champion, then Drayton is the XX-champion, and it just feels like they called Carmine because she's Kieran's sister. Because she's not doing the league club, she isn't shown to be particularly stronger than the other members of the Elite Four and stuff. She's just called because the story wants her to be there. Though I will say it's a really fun touch how Drayton is called for the expedition, but he just refuses. That's so in character for him. And it also is like a clever way to bring back only the people that the story wants to focus on without making it seem too contrived, even though Carmine being there, if you ask me, is already kind of contrived. But going into that expedition and stuff, it's you, Kieran, Carmine, and Mrs. Breyer, and it's a little bit weird how Mrs. Briar is just kind of nuts. I do enjoy that Pokemon it's making adult characters who aren't perfect now. We saw that a lot with the base game and, you know, the whole story with the professor and stuff, how we can have, you know, flawed characters, and we can have flawed characters who are also supposed to be authority figures, and it's kind of like an interesting exploration. It's very bold for this kind of like children-focused franchise, so to speak, to do adult characters in authority positions who aren't actually perfect people, who can make mistakes. And Mrs. Bright is just kind of fucking nuts, because she's really obsessed with the terrestrialization stuff and everything about Area Zero, and she just makes irresponsible choice after irresponsible choice for the sake of her research. And it is kind of endearing, but it is also kind of absurd how she just, yeah, let's bring in like these children to this massively dangerous place and not take any precautions at all and just incentivize them to do this insanely dangerous stuff. It's kind of over the top. Maybe they should have like dialed it back. But I do like the idea of making more flawed adult characters who aren't necessarily evil. On top of that, Kieran's still going through his whole mental breakdown, his whole arc thing. It just only really gets resolved by the very end of this portion of the story. So weirdly enough, Carmine is probably the most reasonable person in the room, and I didn't think I'd be saying that at any point in this DLC, because again, she's kind of a jerk. There we go. I guess that's her redemption. But yeah, getting into the very end of this part of the story, I really enjoy Kieran's whole breakdown, and it's seriously interesting because it actually explores some pretty interesting questions about talented people and how they come about, and how some people are just kind of more lucky than others. And it's very endearing because, you know, as the protagonist of a Pokemon game, or like a JRPG in general, usually, your character is kind of indefatigable. Your character is kind of supposed to be this perfect person who does everything right and never makes mistakes and is always loved by everyone. And usually these games don't really question it. Even stuff like, not even just Pokemon, even stuff like Fire Emblem, sometimes they're just like, oh, Professor, you're the best. You're just the best person around, and everyone just loves you. And it's part of the whole power fantasy thing. And I feel like this DLC kind of deconstructs that with Kieran, because here we have this person who is not perfect, but desperately compares himself to the player character, and it starts feeling terrible because of that. Because no matter what, Pokemon has to, you know, offer you the legendary Pokemon they're selling you on. They have to make sure you're the best, because that's the point of the story, kind of. You're supposed to get to the top and be the champion and stuff. We've even seen like some discussions on Twitter about that, people disagreeing about that, if Kieran is just justified or not for his whole reaction to this. Because from his perspective, you just have this kid who's super lucky and talented and charismatic, and he just does everything right and gets everything he's ever wanted. And even though Kieran's trying so hard and so hard, he just can't reach it. And even though he doesn't treat it in the best way, Kieran is not justified over how terrible he's become by part 2. It's really interesting to see just how he keeps trying, and he just doesn't understand why you're so perfect. He's trying everything, and despite that, you're always gonna be the best one. And it is something that's almost a little frustrating, but I think that's exactly what the game wants you to feel, because there's nothing you can do about that. You know that by the end of this DLC, you're gonna get Terapagos yourself. It's the legendary in the box. You gotta complete Dex. So yeah, you're gonna get it. And it almost feels like you're walking towards disaster as you're going, where like, oh god, I don't know if I want to be doing this or not. I don't want to destroy this kid's hopes and dreams even more. Even though, yeah, he's acting entitled by that point. By the end, I actually didn't want to catch Terapagos. After, you know, Kieran loses Terapagos and you're supposed to catch it yourself, like, the game gives you the option to catch it or not. And I ended up catching it because I recognize, you know, it's a video game and I might need this for competitive battling in the future if this Pokemon ends up being allowed and if it's good. So I caught it, but like I keep wondering what would happen if you decided to not catch it. Probably the game would just force you to do it anyway, but if I had the option, like if I were a character, if I were my player character inside the game universe there, I would want to give Terapagos to Kieran. The kid needs it. The kid, I mean, maybe it's not the most responsible decision, but you know, it's that, like, you just keep getting the things Kieran wants. You keep being so lucky and so talented and so perfect. I feel like the game could have explored this a little bit more, but seeing as this is Pokemon, like, there's only so much you can do, and I like what they did with this already as far as, like, raising those questions. I wish you could have done more about it as a character. As a player, you could have somehow failed intentionally or not, I wish you could have failed and let Kieran have something for once. Maybe that's not the most healthiest attitudes for him, but I do seriously feel for the little dude in the sense that, yeah, we are kind of annoyingly perfect. And yeah, it's neat how the game acknowledges that. In the end, he does come to his senses and recognize that he's being a little bit of an asshole by being so entitled and stuff and trying so hard to the point where he's actually being mean and bad to everyone, which is right. Kieran was being mean and bad to everyone, but the foundation behind his problem is still something that's seriously interesting to analyze, and I feel like in future games, maybe they could explore the idea of you failing a little bit more, of you not being this perfect idea, this perfect idealization of a Pokemon trainer for the sake of keeping the power fantasy up. But yeah, even then, like, you have this hype battle with Terrapagos, and I will admit, I don't know if I like it as much as the base game. The base game's final boss is insane, and we all love it. Even people who don't like the game, I think most people can agree that that final boss was just nuts, with the professor and all that. And this is trying to be hyped like that, and it's tying into Kieran's story, but it's that thing where, like, it's trying to finish Kieran's story, but it's also trying to tie in the base game without really tying in the base game at all, and it's a little bit weird. And by the end, some of the questions about Paradox Pokemon that were raised right at the end of the base game are still not answered. So I was kind of left a little bit underwhelmed by that initial ending when I got to the credits. And also there's the fact that at the moment I was playing the DLC, at that part of the DLC, I was not in the best place mentally, and I was outside doing something else, and I feel like that kind of affected my perception of that ending, because I wasn't even able to, like, listen to the music properly, the amazing music, by the way, I went back and listened to, and gosh, that final battle with the Terrapagos song, like, so good, so good. The use of leitmotifs is yes. So yeah, guys, remember to value important moments in your media. Don't just plow through it because you want to plow through it. Make sure you're actually enjoying what you're playing, or else you may regret it later. Make sure you give it the attention it deserves, because this stuff is art. TV shows, games, they're made with care and attention and detail, and if you just sort of like consume them as whatever, you might miss out on some of the best parts because you're just not in the right place or the right state of mind to do so, and that's kind of what happened for me at the ending there. But overall, looking back, it was pretty good, aside from, again, feeling a little bit disconnected from a lot of the stuff about Area Zero. But then that is kind of made up by the final cutscene, where if you bring Terrapagos to the lake, whatever it's called, the lake in Kitakami, you get to see this crazy cutscene with the professor, and they actually address some of the questions about how the Paradox Pokemon work and how the time travel stuff actually went down. And you kind of create a time paradox, and it's kind of insane, and I love it. I'll say it's a bit convoluted in some senses. When I finished the cutscene, I seriously had to, like, think about it and ponder on it and look up some things people said online about it to really understand what it was trying to say and what happened and whatnot. But just for the idea itself and the attempt to do something really ambitious with, you know, all this time travel shenanigans and time paradoxes, and still, you know, committing to the whole professor story from the base game and stuff, I do enjoy it a lot. I feel like it could have been done a little bit more gracefully and a little bit more understandably, because a lot of questions are still, like, up in the air, and there's a lot of stuff that's just kind of still up for interpretation. But just, like, ending the game on a freaking time paradox is insane, and it doesn't feel like Pokemon at all in the best way possible. But yeah, with that, we're sort of done with the DLC. I did the post-game stuff with Team Star after that. It was really fun. I just love these characters, and spending more time with them is always great. And we're gonna get the epilogue pretty soon, and I believe it's already leaked. Some people have played it already, but generally speaking, we're already done with Scarlet and Violet in general. And it's so good. I'm kind of sad to see it go, honestly, because going through most of this year, there was still, like, the waiting for the DLC and the idea of the DLC that's still coming up. So even though it was mostly a complete game, we still had something to look forward to. And we still have the epilogue, of course, but that's going to be just maybe 1 or 2 hours of extra gameplay. And I'm really looking forward to that, because Marvin and Nimona and Benny are back, and yay, but it's probably closer to, like, an event, to, like, this whole extra part of the story. So, let's come in with, measured expectations. The whole of the game itself is kind of already done. And in retrospect, I'm really happy with how it all turned out. It's probably my single favorite Pokemon game, especially since it got me into competitive play too. And even though it's so recent, it kind of already has a very big spot in my memories and my heart and stuff. Like, it made an impact on me. And that's the best thing I can say about a game ever. It made an impact on me. It means a lot to me, and it represents this whole portion of my life that kicked up late last year and is going on up until now. And I seriously hope the developers, they don't dial back on this ambition and these story ideas and this character writing for the next game and for all of the following mainline Pokemon games, because this is seriously so great. I just hope they get more time and resources to actually make these games polished, because what we have here is pretty amazing, honestly. It's now just a matter of focusing on what's good and making sure what's bad is actually fixed by some point. I honestly wouldn't mind longer generations. Maybe if you want to do more DLC, then sure, that's great, actually. I wouldn't mind longer generations, longer wait times between games, if it means we can get games with this baseline core quality alongside more polished technical stuff, such as, graphics and quality assurance as far as glitches go and whatnot. And yeah, let's end on that note. Remember to like this video if you enjoyed it. Maybe send a comment with your thoughts on the DLC and what you thought about it and Scarlet and Violet as a whole. And yeah, see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye!